It often feels like the world is judging you, but more often what hurts is the moment something you have kept hidden starts to feel visible. That quote, that feeling, is really the heart of what we're going to get into today. So just for a second, right now, as you're listening, just notice your own body. What's happening?
Is there any tightening?
Yeah, clenching in your jaw, maybe, or are your shoulders creeping up?
Or maybe you feel curiosity, a sense
Mhm.
of leaning in, or even a little bit of, a withdrawal.
That physical check-in is so important, isn't it? It's like the first clue.
It's the most important data point. Because, well, long before we form all these complex opinions about other people, your nervous system has already made a decision.
A decision about what's safe.
Exactly. What's safe to reveal about you and what has to, absolutely must, stay hidden. So what we experience as judgment coming from the outside world is, more often than not, just the body recognizing something it learned
Yeah.
to exile, maybe years or even decades ago.
And that idea of exile is so powerful. It's not gone, it's just locked away.
It's in the basement, using energy to stay there.
So today we are doing a deep dive into how that protection gets built, how it quietly starts to warp our perception of everything, and most importantly, how we can start to move toward a state of sovereignty, a place where we have more clarity.
Hmm.
And this whole reflection is really anchored in some of the powerful insights from an article by Helen Mudeba called When You Feel Judged Everywhere You Go.
And that journey toward sovereignty, it's a process. We've talked before about this framework, the pathway to sovereignty. It isn't a straight line you walk, but it gives us a map for understanding how your perception literally changes as your nervous system starts to feel safer in the present.
Okay, so let's quickly walk through that map just so we have a sense of the landscape we're exploring today.
Right. So at the very foundation, we have survival. This is purely reflexive. It's that automatic, non-negotiable fight, flight, freeze, or the fawn response.
The fawn response, that's the pleasing, right? The
Yeah.
immediate impulse to placate.
That's the one. Then just above that, there's a level we call seeking stability. Here, the conscious mind gets involved. It's trying to manage all that underlying fear, usually through things like control or perfectionism and performance, or maybe withdrawal.
So those first two levels are really about just managing a threat, whether you're aware of it or not.
Yes, the pattern is running you. The big shift happens with level 3, which is self-awareness. This is the moment you can actually see the pattern as a pattern instead of just being completely inside of it.
You can name it. Oh, there I go again, trying to control everything.
Precisely. And that awareness opens the door to integrity. And integrity here means you start acting in alignment with your values, even when the fear is still there. You're choosing your action, not just reacting.
Which sounds incredibly difficult.
It is. It's where the real work begins. And that leads to the final two levels. Wholeness, which is the capacity to hold both the fear and your chosen direction at the same time without falling apart.
You don't have to get rid of the fear to move forward.
You just make space for it. And that brings us to freedom. And freedom is, it's flexibility, it's self-trust. It's being able to make a choice without your nervous system just automatically overriding everything.
Okay, that's a fantastic overview. Let's dig into the core mechanism then. This idea that the nervous system prioritizes survival over truth. What does that actually look like in, say, early life?
Well, it happens in a blink. Imagine you're a little kid and you have this boundless imagination. You're full of big ideas, big emotions. And when you express that, maybe it's met with irritation or ridicule. Or maybe a parent just withdraws because they're overwhelmed.
They can't handle the bigness of it.
Right. And the child system gets a very clear, very fast instruction. This quality, this part of me, is unsafe. It doesn't analyze if the parent was tired or stressed. The nervous system just learns. Hide this to stay connected.
So that quality, the imagination or the big emotions, it doesn't just disappear, it gets exiled. It's the part you mentioned that gets banished to the basement.
Exactly. But it takes a huge amount of energy to keep that part suppressed.
Yeah.
And that energy manifests as physical tension. You know, that tight jaw we talked about, or the shallow breathing, or just a constant sense of bracing for impact.
And because the system is on guard duty inside, watching that exiled part, it becomes hyper aware of that same quality outside in other people.
It becomes a threat detector for that very thing.
Yeah.
This is the root of projection. What you had to suppress in yourself is now the very thing you can't stand or judge most harshly or maybe even secretly admire or resent in other people.
So when I have a huge reaction to someone I think is being, I don't know, lazy or selfish.
The intensity of your judgment is a clue. It's very likely that exiled part of you, the part that was never allowed to rest or have its own needs, screaming, look, there it is, The thing we are never, ever allowed to be. We have to attack it.
Wow. And flipping that around, the feeling of being judged externally. That's often the same mechanism at work, just point inward first. It's that internal critic anticipating the hit before it comes.
It's an efficiency model. The system is reading the present moment through the old filter of the past. That critical voice you hear in a perfectly silent room, that isn't a new voice. It's the old protective voice that learned if it criticizes you first, the pain of someone else doing it will be less shocking.
It's protection that feels like self-sabotage.
That's the paradox.
Yeah.
It feels terrible, but its original intent was to keep you safe.
Okay, this is so rich. Let's make it more concrete. I think looking at the narratives you've mapped out would be really helpful here.
Let's say. We start with Soraya. Soraya was an activist, deeply committed, but she felt constantly judged by people who she felt did less. In meetings, she was always bracing herself, reading criticism into everything.
What did that look like? Like, how would she interpret things?
Oh, a colleague leans back in their chair. They're disengaged. They think her idea is naive. Someone glances at their phone. They're disrespecting the work. A moment of silence after she speaks. They hated it.
So her behavior was driven by this moral rigidity and constant vigilance. It sounds exhausting.
Deeply. She was stuck in seeking stability through overfunctioning. She truly believed that if she didn't carry all the responsibility, the whole cause would just collapse. Her judgment of others was really a judgment of her own disowned need to rest, to not be the only one holding it all up.
So her sense of superiority, her judgment of their inaction, was actually a shield. It was protecting her from her own vulnerability, which was just this desperate need for rest and support.
A need she saw as a catastrophic failure.
What broke that pattern for her? What was the catalyst?
Her body, essentially. She hit a wall of pure physical exhaustion and was forced to take time off. And in her absence, a junior colleague she'd secretly judged as not committed enough stepped up and managed her projects.
And everything didn't fall apart?
Not only did it not fall apart, but he did things differently and effectively. It completely shattered her worldview. That was her entry into self-awareness. She saw, maybe for the first time, that her judgment wasn't about her colleagues. It was a mask for her terror of being vulnerable.
Her whole identity was wrapped up in being the one who cared the most. The shift then was learning to let others carry what wasn't hers to carry alone.
And that moved her toward integrity. She started choosing collaboration over control, even when it felt terrifying.
Which brings up such a powerful question for all of us. Where have you, in your life, turned responsibility into a form of superiority?
This is a sharp question.
Okay, let's turn to the second story, to Layla. You described her as a woman who couldn't rest unless she felt approved of. This sounds like that fawn response we mentioned.
Absolutely. She was a master of the survival fawn response. Hyper-attuned to everyone around her, always ready to shift her opinion, her mood, anything to keep the peace and gain approval.
The classic people pleaser. She is probably seen as the perfect employee, the perfect friend.
Because she never had any needs of her own, or at least she never expressed them. The cost, as she put it, was feeling like a ghost in her own life.
What was the origin of that pattern? The story behind it?
For her, it was growing up in a home where her needs or her negative emotions were seen as a burden. They created anxiety or caused her parents to retreat. So the system learned a simple rule. My unfiltered presence causes problems. To be loved, I must be invisible.
What was the moment that forced her to confront this?
Again, it was her body. She had worked for years toward a huge career goal, a major job interview. And the morning of, she got so physically sick she couldn't get out of bed. The freeze response was so absolute, so undeniable, she couldn't ignore the price of her constant performance anymore.
Her body just said, no more.
It did. And that was her forced entry into self-awareness. She saw that her constant approval-seeking wasn't kindness. It was a rigid, exhausting protection strategy.
The piece by Helen Mudiba describes her pivot as something really small but profound.
Yes. She started practicing these tiny moments of honoring her needs without justifying them. The biggest tool was the pause. Before answering a question, she would take a breath, a tiny pause to distinguish between the impulse coming from fear and the answer coming from her own choice.
That little gap between stimulus and response.
That is the bridge to integrity. It's everything. It allowed her to do something that felt radical, like saying, I'm going to take my full lunch break today, even if her nervous system was screaming that she was being selfish and difficult.
Which leads to another one of those really essential reflection questions. What part of you learned that rest or just being instead of doing was dangerous? The final case, Renata, the scholar, this one feels different. Her issue wasn't pleasing, it was Certainty.
Yes. Renata was overwhelmed by what she saw as the ignorance of others. Her world was built on principles, on clear opinions. She would move from an observation to a moral judgment in a heartbeat. Her colleagues were selfish. Her friends lacked empathy.
What was that strategy protecting?
It was pure, seeking stability through intellectual superiority. In her childhood, love and safety were conditional on being right, on not failing. So judging others became her primary defense. If I am the one judging, then I cannot be the one who is being judged as flawed.
So if that intellectual armor ever cracked, the vulnerability of being seen as inadequate would just rush in.
It would be catastrophic.
Yeah.
So judgment was her shield.
What could possibly humble that level of certainty?
A public failure, a big one in her academic field. It was painful, and it exposed that deep core fear of being seen as incompetent. But the real catalyst, the thing that changed everything, came from a friend.
What happened?
Renata was judging this friend for staying in a relationship she deemed unhealthy. After a particularly harsh comment, the friend just looked at her calmly and said, "I'm asking you to trust that I know my own life better than you do."
Oof. That's a powerful boundary.
It shattered her. As Helen Mudeba highlights in the article, that moment was a devastating realization for Renata. It wasn't about being right anymore.
It forced her to see the function of her judgment.
Exactly. It pushed her into integrity and then toward wholeness. She had to choose to be curious about her friend's life and her own instead of defensive. Wholeness, for her, was holding two opposing ideas at once. Her genuine concern for her friend and a deep trust in her friend's autonomy. She finally saw that her judgment, which felt like strong protection, was actually just creating profound isolation.
And the question that emerges from her story is maybe the most direct of all. Who do you judge for the traits you most fear in yourself?
When you look at all three, Soraya, Layla, and Renata, the underlying pattern becomes so clear.
Yeah.
Judgment is not the problem. Protection is. When you feel judged or when you find yourself judging others, it's almost always the nervous system trying to manage an exiled part of you. It's trying to keep that basement door locked tight. The work isn't to stop judging. It's to help your nervous system update its map, to realize the old threat isn't active anymore.
But in that moment, when the judgment hits or you feel it coming at you, that's almost impossible to remember. You need a tool, something practical to interrupt that automatic loop.
Right. And that's where the simple practice we call calm, C-A-L-M. It's a bridge from that reflexive reaction to a conscious choice.
Okay, break it down for us.
So, C, check the story. The first step is just to notice the narrative that's running. What do I think is happening right now? And you just name it silently to yourself. The story is that I'm about to be rejected. Or the story is this person is incompetent and I have to fix this.
Just naming it creates a little bit of space. It separates you from the story.
Instantly. Then A, acknowledge the impulse. What does your body want to do right now? Apologize, defend yourself, shut down, lash out. Just notice the raw impulse without acting on it. It's just an impulse, it's not a command.
I can feel how hard that step is, to just notice without doing.
It's the hardest part. And it leads right to L, locate the state. Ask yourself, where is this response coming from? Is it coming from fear, from old habit, or is it coming from a place of clear, calm presence? If your body is tight and your mind is racing, that's your clue. You are responding to the past.
That's the real pause button, realizing you're in a time machine.
Yes. And only then can you get to M. Move wisely. This means acting from your values, not from your reflex. If you value connection, does judging this person create connection? If you value integrity, does shrinking and apologizing serve that? Moving wisely means your values guide the action, even if the fear hasn't completely gone away.
That's a framework you can actually use in the heat of the moment. Check the story, acknowledge the impulse, locate the state, and move wisely.
Yes.
It really brings us back to the core reflection for today. When your body no longer has to spend all that energy protecting an exiled part of you, the world just stops looking so dangerous. What you finally integrate within yourself, your own need for rest, your own vulnerability, your own imperfection, you no longer have to manage or attack it in the outside world. So just take one breath here. Let that land. Notice what's present for you right now.
And for anyone who wants to go deeper with this work, we do have a couple of resources that can really support this journey. There's a free guided somatic practice called Where Am I on the Pathway to Sovereignty? It's designed to help you feel in your body where your perception is narrowing and how to invite safety back in.
And there's also a journal?
Yes, it's called Your Path to Choosing Joy. It's a guided journey to help you get really clear on your values so you can start practicing choosing from that place of wholeness, not from fear. You can find links to both of those in the show notes.
Perfect.
You know, it all comes down to this one final thought. When you feel safe enough to see yourself clearly, the world no longer needs to judge you.
Climb the staircase, breath by breath, with compassion and presence we rise from stress, from fear to peace, from shame to grace. Climb the staircase to sovereignty. When you feel unsafe, too much to bear, you shut down a flare, you vanish, your glare, your heart beats fast, your breath runs tight, you just want out or to make it right. That's survival, the you that just wants to survive.
What you feel is complete power.